She knew my brother's name before I ever mentioned it. That should have been my first warning. My name is Marcus Webb, and I've been riding with the Iron Wolves Motorcycle Club for 12 years. We're not troublemakers. We fix bikes, help the community, and look out for each other. But 3 months ago, everything changed when my younger brother Danny vanished. The police said he was last seen at the Velvet Room, a nightclub on the outskirts of Manchester. Danny was studying law at university, clean-cut and ambitious, the complete opposite of me. But security footage showed him there on the night of October 15th, and then nothing. So I decided to investigate myself. What I discovered wasn't just about Danny. It was about something ancient that had been operating in that club for decades. The police files mentioned 17 missing persons over the past 20 years. All men, all last seen at the Velvet Room, all forgotten by a system that didn't care enough to dig deeper. This is the story of how I learned that some mysteries run deeper than anyone imagines. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know what time you're watching and what city you're from. Because if enough people know this story, maybe others won't have to go through what my family did. The Velvet Room sat at the end of Crimson Street, like a shadow against the Manchester skyline. Red neon letters buzzed against brick walls that hadn't seen maintenance since the 80s, the kind of place where people went to escape their problems. I parked my motorcycle between a rusted car and an expensive sedan. Rich or poor, the Velvet Room seemed to welcome all kinds of visitors. Inside, the air was thick with cigarette smoke and cologne. Red velvet booths lined the walls, and a stage dominated the center. The lighting was dim, and classic rock played at a volume that encouraged quiet conversation. I ordered a drink and observed the room. 3 dancers worked the floor, but it was the woman on stage who caught my attention. She moved with impossible grace. Dark hair cascaded down her back, and when she turned, her eyes met mine across the smoky room, green eyes that seemed to reflect the stage lights unusually brightly. She smiled, and I felt something shift in my chest. First time here. The bartender was cleaning glasses. 60 years old, thin gray hair, wedding ring. Yeah, looking for information about my brother. Many people come looking for information. Not all find what they're hoping for. I showed him Danny's photo, Danny Webb. He was here 3 weeks ago. The bartender studied the picture. Don't recognize him, but I see many faces. What about her? I nodded toward the stage. Scarlett? She's been here longer than anyone. Knows all the regular customers. Scarlett. The name fit her perfectly. The song ended, and she stepped down from the stage. She moved through the crowd with confidence, stopping at tables, chatting with customers, but her path led straight to me. You're new. Her voice was smooth with an English accent. Just passing through? Maybe. No one just passes through the Velvet Room. We're not on the way to anywhere else. She sat on the stool next to mine. Her perfume was roses with something metallic underneath. What's your name? Marcus. Marcus. She seemed to taste the name. Strong name, Roman name. What brings you here, Marcus? I'm looking for someone. Aren't we all? She signaled for 2 drinks. Who are you looking for? I showed her Danny's photo. Her reaction was subtle but noticeable. A brief pause. A change in her breathing. I don't think I've seen him. But she had. I could tell. You learn to read people in my line of work. Scarlett was hiding something. He's my brother, Danny Webb. Her pupils dilated slightly. Webb. Interesting family name. I spent the next week researching the Velvet Room's history. What I found was disturbing. The building had been a nightclub since 1972. Before that, it was a textile factory where 17 women lost their lives in a fire. The official cause was electrical failure, but newspaper archives told a different story. Witnesses reported seeing figures moving inside the building after the fire started, figures that didn't evacuate. The club opened exactly 1 year after the fire. The original owner committed himself to a mental institution 6 months later. His final statement mentioned hunger that cannot be satisfied and debts that must be paid. Ownership changed hands 7 times over 50 years. 3 more mental breakdowns, 2 mysterious disappearances. 1 man found deceased in his car outside the club from apparent heart failure, though he was only 34 years old. But it was the pattern of missing persons that really caught my attention. 17 men over 20 years, all between 25 and 40, all single, all seen leaving the club with an unidentified woman matching Scarlett's description. The police reports were minimal. Missing adults weren't a priority, especially those who frequented nightclubs. I found 3 families willing to talk. Sarah Henderson lost her son Michael in 2018. Jennifer Price lost her husband David in 2015. Margaret Collins lost her brother James in 2012. All described the same thing. Their loved ones had been acting strangely in the weeks before they disappeared, withdrawn, secretive, obsessed with a woman they'd met, a woman with green eyes and dark hair, who seemed to know personal details they'd never shared. Michael started having nightmares. Sarah told me over tea. He said he could hear singing, but couldn't make out the words. He stopped eating, lost 20 pounds in 2 weeks. Then one night he walked out and never returned. David Price had left behind a journal. His wife let me read the final entries. She knows about the accident, knows about what I did. I never told anyone, but she knows, says she can make the guilt go away. The dreams are getting stronger. I can feel her calling me. Can't think about anything else. I know I shouldn't go back, but I can't stop myself. James Collins had been found in his apartment 3 days after he disappeared. Officially, he'd suffered a stroke, but the paramedic who found him told his sister something different. He looked like he'd aged 50 years overnight, she said, and there were marks on his neck, tiny puncture wounds. The paramedic was Peter Morrison. I found him at a pub in Salford. After a few drinks, he was willing to talk. 17 years on the job, and I'd never seen anything like it. The man appeared to have rapidly aged, and those marks on his neck, 2 small holes, perfectly round. Did you report it? The coroner ruled it natural causes. Who would believe a story about supernatural occurrences? I returned to the Velvet Room the following Friday. Scarlett was waiting. Marcus, I hoped you'd return. She wore a red dress that seemed to move independently. The fabric shifted and flowed like liquid, and the light caught it strangely. Have you thought about our conversation? About my brother? Yeah, I've thought about it. Your brother was troubled. So much guilt, so much shame. My blood chilled. You said you didn't know him. I said I didn't think I'd seen him, but I remember now. He told me about the accident, the little girl on the bicycle. Danny had never told anyone about that incident. He was 16, driving without a license. A girl ran into the street chasing a ball. Danny swerved and hit a tree instead. The girl was unharmed, but Danny never forgave himself for what could have happened. He never told anyone about that. He told me people share their secrets with me, Marcus. Their regrets, their deepest fears. She moved closer. He wanted peace. I gave it to him. Where is he? Safe, free from guilt, free from pain. I want to see him. That's not possible, but I can offer you the same peace. She touched my hand. Her skin was cold, but her touch sent electricity through my body. Images flashed through my mind. Danny's face, peaceful and calm. A dark room filled with sleeping figures. An ancient hunger. You carry guilt too, Marcus. I can sense it. The fight that went too far. The person who needed help that you didn't give. The the children you could have saved if you'd acted. How did she know about Manchester? About the fight where someone got seriously hurt? About Linda Morrison, who needed help that I was too afraid to provide? About the house fire where I heard voices but was too scared to investigate? I can take it all away. All the guilt, all the pain, all the memories that keep you awake. Her eyes were mesmerizing. Green depths that seemed to contain entire worlds. I felt myself leaning forward. Just say yes, Marcus. Say yes, and I'll show you where your brother is. Yes. The word escaped before I could stop it. Scarlett smiled, and her teeth seemed unusually sharp. Wonderful. Come to me tomorrow night, after closing. Use the back entrance. Yes. And Marcus, come alone. I spent Saturday preparing for what might be my final investigation. First, I visited Father Mackenzie at St. Bartholomew's. He'd known me since childhood. I told him I needed to borrow some items. Holy water, blessed silver, a consecrated cross. Marcus, what are you planning? Something I should have done years ago. Jack, he didn't ask questions, just provided what I needed and told me to be careful. Next, I visited my storage unit. Among the motorcycle parts, I had a collection of items I'd hoped never to use. A wooden stake, carved from blessed wood. A mirror backed with silver, salt that had been consecrated. My grandmother had been Irish. She'd filled my head with stories about supernatural creatures. I'd thought they were just stories, until I started noticing patterns in missing persons cases. I loaded my saddlebags with everything I thought I might need. The blessed silver went into my jacket, along with holy water. The wooden stake went into my boot. The salt went into a pouch on my belt. Then I wrote a detailed account of everything I'd discovered. Names, dates, evidence. I left it with instructions to be opened if I didn't return by Monday. As the sun set over Manchester, I started my bike and headed for the Velvet Room one last time. The club was closed, but the back door was unlocked as promised. I stepped into darkness. The main floor looked different, empty. Tables cast strange shadows in the emergency lighting. The stage looked ominous, without performers. Marcus, her voice seemed to come from everywhere. I'm glad you came. She emerged from the shadows, wearing white. Her hair hung loose, and her green eyes reflected light strangely. Where's my brother? Downstairs. They're all downstairs, resting. She led me through a door I hadn't noticed before. Behind it, narrow stairs descended into complete darkness. The walls were stone, much older than the building above. The air grew colder with each step. The textile factory wasn't the first building here, Scarlett said as we descended. There was a church once, 13th century. It was destroyed during the plague years. 17 women lost their lives. They refused to abandon their sacred duties. The staircase ended in a circular chamber carved from rock. 17 stone alcoves lined the walls, and in each lay a figure in white robes. Their faces were peaceful, but their skin was pale and stretched thin. They've been here for 700 years, sleeping, dreaming, sustained by others' guilt. In the center was an altar of black stone. Fresh flowers decorated its surface, and 17 candles burned around it. The air smelled of roses and age. During the plague, they made a bargain. Eternal rest in exchange for eternal service. They would feed on guilt and shame, drawing sustenance from human suffering. In return, they would offer peace to those seeking forgiveness. I saw him then, Danny. He lay in the 17th alcove, wearing white robes like the others. His face was peaceful, but his body was merely skin and bones. You took his life. I freed him. They all came seeking forgiveness. I gave them what they asked for, by draining them, by taking their guilt, their shame, their painful memories. They sleep now in perfect peace, free from earthly suffering. She moved toward the altar. You've come seeking the same peace. No, you already agreed. The bargain is sealed. I felt compulsion hit me like a physical force. My legs started moving toward the altar against my will. The guilt I'd carried for years rose in my chest. The fight that went wrong. The person I failed to help. The children I couldn't save. That's right. Come to me. Let me take it all away. I fought the compulsion, but it was like fighting gravity. Each step brought me closer to the altar. You don't understand. I gasped. I'm not here for forgiveness. Everyone who comes to me seeks forgiveness. Not me. I reached into my jacket and poured out the holy water. I'm here for justice. I threw the holy water at the altar. It splashed across the black stone, and steam rose where it touched. Scarlet screamed, a sound like breaking glass that echoed through the chamber. The sleeping figures began to stir. 17 pairs of eyes opened, glowing green in the candlelight. I pulled the wooden stake from my boot and lunged at Scarlet. She moved incredibly fast, but I'd been in enough fights to anticipate quick opponents. The stake caught her shoulder, and dark liquid sprayed across her white dress. She struck back, sending me across the chamber. I hit the wall hard, but the blessed silver in my pocket protected me from the worst of it. I rolled to my feet as she advanced. You cannot destroy us. We are eternal. Maybe, but I can try. I threw the silver mirror at her feet. It shattered on the stone floor, and she recoiled from the blessed metal. That gave me time to pour a circle of salt around the altar. The other figures were fully awake now, rising from their alcoves, but they couldn't cross the salt line. They pressed against it like solid glass. 700 years, Scarlet hissed. 700 years we have served. You cannot end it with simple tools. Watch me. I pulled out the consecrated cross. It blazed with silver light in the darkness, and all 17 figures recoiled. But Scarlet was stronger than the others. She forced herself forward, pushing against the holy radiance. I have fed on the guilt of thousands. I have grown strong on human suffering. Your symbols have limited power here. She was right. The cross was slowing her down, but not stopping her. I needed something more. That's when I remembered what Father Mackenzie had told me about consecrated ground. The church that had stood here 700 years ago had been built on holy ground. The foundation stones were still blessed. I struck the cross against the altar. It cracked open, spilling blessed oil across the black stone. The oil ran into carved lines, following ancient patterns, lines that formed a binding seal. No, Scarlet's voice filled with terror. You don't understand what you're doing. But I did understand. The seal had been carved 700 years ago. A binding spell designed to contain something dangerous. They hadn't made a bargain during the plague. They had been imprisoned here by holy men who understood the threat. The seal began to glow with silver light. The 17 figures screamed in unison. One by one, they began to dissolve, their forms breaking apart like smoke. Please, Scarlet begged, don't send us back to the void. You condemned 17 men to eternal sleep. You condemned my brother to a living death. We can make a deal. I can bring him back. For a moment, I was tempted, but I looked at Danny's form in the alcove and knew it was too late. Goodbye. The seal flared with brilliant light. Scarlet's scream cut off as she was poured into the stone, her body stretching before disappearing completely. The other figures followed until only silence remained. The chamber began to collapse as the ancient binding reasserted itself. I grabbed Danny's body and ran for the stairs as 700-year-old stone crumbled around me. The main floor was already on fire, flames spreading from below as supernatural forces clashed with reality. I made it to the parking lot just as the building collapsed. The fire department arrived 20 minutes later, but there was nothing to save. The Velvet Room was gone, reduced to rubble and ash. The official investigation blamed structural failure and electrical problems. No one mentioned the 17 bodies found in the basement, or the fact that they appeared to be historical remains. The coroner ruled it an unknown burial site from centuries past. I buried Danny in Blackwood Cemetery, next to our parents. The funeral was small, just me and a few university friends who remembered him as the bright young man he'd been. 3 months later, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a leather journal filled with handwritten accounts, stories from other men who'd encountered similar beings in different cities: London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Edinburgh. The last entry was dated 2 weeks ago. Her name is Vivian, and she works at a club called Paradise Lost in Glasgow. She has red hair and gold eyes, and she knows things about me that I've never told anyone. I know I shouldn't return, but I can't stop thinking about her. It was signed with initials, RM. I've been riding north for 3 days now. Glasgow's still 200 miles away, but I can sense something calling. Not to me directly, but to someone else. Someone whose guilt and shame are broadcasting across the spiritual airwaves. The journal contained 47 stories from across the UK. 47 men who'd encountered beings like Scarlet. Some had escaped, others hadn't been so fortunate, but all described the same thing: beautiful women who seemed to know their deepest secrets, women who promised peace but delivered only eternal sleep. I've started connecting the patterns. This goes back centuries. Always the same. Always 17 victims before the creature moves to a new hunting ground. Always the same promise of forgiveness that ends in tragedy. The Velvet Room wasn't unique. It was part of a network, a system that stretched across the entire country, maybe the entire world. I called the number listed in RM's journal entry. It went straight to voicemail. Robert Morrison. Probably another family about to lose someone to an ancient hunger. Paradise Lost sits on Sochi Hall Street like a neon spider waiting for prey. From outside, it looks exactly like the Velvet Room. Red lights, dark walls, the promise of easy absolution for those carrying heavy guilt. I parked across the street and watched for 2 hours. 17 men went inside. None came out. But I did see her. Vivian, standing in the doorway, scanning the street like she was looking for someone specific. Red hair that moved like fire. Gold eyes that seemed to glow in the streetlights. When her gaze passed over me, I felt the familiar pull, the promise of peace, the lie of forgiveness. She smiled and went back inside. The hunt continues, because it has to, because ordinary people deserve protection from extraordinary threats, because someone has to stand between the darkness and the light. If you're watching this, remember what I've told you. Subscribe and share this story. Tell people what's really out there, because awareness is our best defense against things that hunt in the shadows. And if you ever find yourself in a club where the performer knows your name before you give it, where she seems to understand your deepest secrets, where she promises to take your guilt away, leave immediately. Don't hesitate. Don't listen to promises of peace and absolution. Just leave, because some hungers can never be satisfied, and some prices are too high to pay, even for forgiveness. The air in Silent Hollow tasted like damp earth and forgotten secrets. They said it was just a town, nestled deep in the Oregon woods, beautiful in a lonely, isolated way. Pine trees reaching toward the sky, mist clinging to the valleys. But beneath the beauty lay silence and something else, something that remembered things the living tried to forget. 20 years ago, people started disappearing here. One by one, no trace, no bodies, just gone. The official reports whispered of accidents, maybe a transient threat passing through. But the locals knew. They knew the woods held a different kind of mystery. My name's Ethan Hayes. I came to Silent Hollow, chasing a ghost from my own past. My younger sister Sarah, she was one of the lost, vanished from our yard, just a few miles outside this town, 2 decades ago, never found. I came here as a journalist, ostensibly to write a cold case feature, to finally give a voice to the missing. But mostly, I came for answers. For Sarah, I thought I was ready to unearth the dark truth. I wasn't ready for the truth to know my name before I even knocked on the first door. This isn't just a true crime story. It started that way. It became something else, something that crawls out of the oldest parts of the world. This is what happened when I went looking for the people who vanished. This is the story of Silent Hollow, and what the pines remember. Before we dive into the heart of the hollow, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon. Your support helps us bring these stories to light. Now, let's begin. My car rolled to a stop outside the only motel in Silent Hollow, the Hollow Inn. It looked exactly like the photos online. Weathered wood, a fading sign, a porch swing creaking in the still air, nestled right at the edge of where the few scattered houses gave way to the imposing, dark wall of the forest. The motel lobby was small and dim. It smelled of old coffee and dust. An elderly woman emerged from a doorway, wiping her hands on an apron. Her face was weathered, her eyes tired and cautious. This was Agnes, the owner. "Help you, son?" she asked. Her voice was raspy. "Yes, ma'am. Ethan Hayes. I booked a room online for a week." She peered at the screen on her counter. Her eyes lingered on my name for a beat too long. "Hayes," she murmured. Not a question, a recognition. My stomach tightened. "Just visiting?" she asked, her gaze sharp now. I hesitated. "Research for a story." She didn't ask what kind of story. She just nodded slowly. Her gaze flickered toward the windows, toward the trees. "Silent Hollow ain't got many stories folks like telling," she said. She handed me a key. "Room 3, ground floor. End of the hall. Don't wander out after dark, son. Especially not toward the woods." "Why not?" I asked. A shadow crossed her face. "The woods got their own rules. Older than ours." As I took the key, I noticed a small framed photograph on the counter. A group of youngsters playing, laughing. It looked old, maybe 25, 30 years. My eyes scanned the faces. In the back, a smaller girl with bright, wide eyes. It looked like Sarah. But that was impossible. This photo was taken before she was even born. Agnes followed my gaze. Her eyes softened slightly, then hardened again. She turned the photo face down. "Memories fade," she said. "Best to let them." I knew where I had to start. The official record. The place where the truth, or at least the official version of it, was buried under layers of dust and bureaucracy. The sheriff's office was located in the small town hall building. One deputy sat at a desk, looking bored. He pointed me toward a back room when I asked about the old disappearance cases. "Chief Brody handles all that. He's retired but keeps the files. Still lives in town, down on Maple Street." Chief Brody's house was small, neat. He was surprisingly willing to see me. A stout man in his late 60s, with kind eyes, but the weight of decades sat heavy on his shoulders. I explained I was a journalist researching the disappearances from the 80s and 90s. I watched his face close off. The kindness in his eyes dimmed, replaced by familiar caution. "Tough subject, son," he said, stirring his tea. 20 years on, nothing new ever turned up. "That's exactly why I'm interested, Chief. Cold cases. Sometimes a fresh look." He sighed. There wasn't much to look at, truth be told. No forced entry. No signs of struggle. Just gone. 5 people in 15 years. Always between ages 4 and 8. always taken from yards or just outside their homes. Any suspects? Hundreds interviewed, everyone ruled out. No connections, no patterns, except where they were taken from. Always close to the woods, always within a half-mile of the hollow. He gestured to a large stack of boxes in the corner. The files are all there. Everything we had, you can look through them. But I warn you, it's frustrating reading. I spent hours going through the boxes. Police reports, witness statements, missing person flyers, the details blurred, desperate parents, fruitless searches, the same phrase repeated, no trace found. But I started noticing things, small inconsistencies. A witness claimed to have seen a tall shadow near the trees, dismissed as imagination, a footprint that didn't match any known shoes, found near a fence line, marked as inconclusive. One report mentioned a strange smell in the air the day after one disappearance, like ozone and wet soil. And the names: Emily Carter, David Jenkins, Sarah Hayes. My sister's file. Seeing her name on the official form was like a punch to the gut. Then I found it tucked inside Sarah's file, a single faded piece of paper, not an official report. It looked like a handwritten note from the first officer on the scene. It described the family dog, Buster, usually friendly, but that day the dog was found hiding under the porch, trembling uncontrollably, wouldn't come out, wouldn't eat, acted like it had seen something terrifying. Not a bear, not a person, something that left no scent. No scent. Most predators leave a scent. Most humans leave a scent. What leaves no scent? I found a small cafe downtown, the Pinecone Diner. It was the closest thing Silent Hollow had to a community hub. I sat at the counter, ordered coffee, tried to look unobtrusive. I started by talking generally about the town, the history. The owner, Brendan, was friendly enough, but her answers were short, guarded. Mentioning the disappearances felt like dropping a stone into still water. Finally, I worked up the courage. I asked Brendan directly about the cases. She stopped wiping the counter, her eyes fixed on the coffee machine. That was a long time ago, honey. A terrible time. Broke this town's heart. Did anyone ever have theories, besides the official ones? She hesitated, then leaned closer. Her voice dropped to a near whisper. Folks talk, whispers, mostly about the hollow. The hollow? That patch of woods back behind the ridge. Darkest part, oldest trees. Some say things live in there that shouldn't. Things from before the town was even here. Things? Spirits, she said, but she didn't sound like she meant ghosts of the dead. Or worse, things that get lonely, things that want company. Her eyes darted toward the window, toward the dark line of the forest. My grandma used to tell stories about the old ones who made deals with the woods, gave up something to keep the peace. Gave up what? Brenda shrugged nervously. She never said exactly, just a price for the quiet, for the trees not to watch you. She straightened up abruptly. It's just old stories though, superstition. As I left, I saw an older man sitting alone at a table. He'd been listening. Outside, I turned. He was still watching me. His face was grim. He raised a hand slowly, then pointed one finger toward the woods. A clear message. Stay away. The library was a small brick building near the town square. It was run by a meticulous woman named Eleanor. She was initially hesitant when I started asking for old town records, local history books, anything about the original settlers or the geography of the area. Most of that's in the archives, she said. Downstairs. It's not really open to the public. There was water damage years ago. I persisted. Finally, she relented. All right, but don't touch anything fragile, and mind the dust. The archives were in the basement. The air was thick with the smell of damp paper and mildew. I spent hours going through brittle newspaper clippings about the town's founding, reports of local events, land deeds. Then I found a series of articles from the late 1920s describing a peculiar sickness that affected several families living near the woods. Not a physical illness, more like a wasting away of identity. People would forget their names, their families. They'd wander toward the woods, talking to themselves in languages no one understood. Buried beneath a stack of old property tax records, I found a small, leather-bound book. It wasn't catalogued. It looked like a personal journal. The handwriting was spidery, difficult to read. The first entry was dated 1931. It belonged to a woman named Ella Vance. She lived on a farm bordering the woods. Her early entries were typical farm life. Weather, crops, neighbors. But then the tone shifted. Mentions of strange sounds at night, shadows moving at the edge of her vision, the unsettling feeling of being watched. The entries became more frantic. She wrote of dreams, vivid, terrifying dreams, where she was lost in a maze of pine needles, and a voice, soft but everywhere, called her name. It promised her things, knowledge, peace, if only she would offer remembrance. Then came the most chilling part, an entry dated later that same year. They took Thomas today, she wrote. Thomas was her young son, just like they took the Miller girl last month. It isn't an animal, it's them, the things from the deep woods. They hunger, not for flesh, for what we are, our names, our stories. They steal the threads that tie us to ourselves, to each other. Elara wrote about the town's reaction. Not panic, a strange, resigned acceptance. The old families, she called them, seemed to know something. They didn't search too hard in the woods. They spoke of appeasement, of recognizing the claim. The journal entries became more erratic. Fragmented thoughts. Elara described seeing figures in the woods, mimicking her loved ones. Her last few entries were almost unreadable. Words repeated, names scrambled. The final entry was just one line. I go to join them. They promised I will remember him there. The Blackwood house stood on a hill overlooking the town. It was imposing, surrounded by ancient oak and pine trees. A woman answered the door. She was middle-aged, with sharp features, dressed in dark, expensive clothes. Her expression was cool, unwelcoming. Miss Blackwood, my name is Ethan Hayes. I'm a journalist researching the town's history, specifically the disappearances. Her eyes narrowed. We have nothing to say about that. I understand it's difficult, but I've found some old records, references to local beliefs about the woods, about something called the Hollow. At the mention of the Hollow, something shifted in her eyes. Fear, recognition. Those are just old stories, superstition. Elara Vance's journal didn't sound like superstition, I said. Her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. You found that? She breathed. It was in the library archives. She wrote about the disappearances, about something taking people's memories, about the old families knowing things. Miss Blackwood was silent for a long moment. Finally, she spoke. Her voice was low, urgent. You need to leave this alone, Mr. Hayes. Some things are better left buried. My sister was taken, Sarah Hayes, 20 years ago. I can't leave it alone. Her face softened for just a second. A flicker of pity. Then it was gone. You think you know grief. You don't know the half of it. Not what this place demands. Not what happens when you don't respect the balance. What balance? There are forces older than humanity in this world, Mr. Hayes. Forces that have their own claims, their own hungers. Sometimes you have to give something to protect what little you have left. You're talking about the missing people. You're saying you knew. She flinched. It isn't that simple. It's a terrible, awful thing. But opening that door, digging it all up, you don't know what you'll unleash. Just go, Mr. Hayes, she pleaded softly, before it takes you too. She closed the door, leaving me standing on the porch in the oppressive silence. I couldn't stop now. The truth about Sarah, about all of them, was tangled up in this dark secret, and the key was in the woods, in the hollow. I changed into sturdier clothes, packed a small bag, water, a flashlight, my recorder, and Alara Vance's journal. Stepping onto the first trail felt like crossing a threshold. The light diminished almost immediately. The trees were dense, ancient, their branches intertwined overhead, blocking out the sky. The further I walked, the quieter it became. The bird song faded, the wind seemed to die down. Only my own footsteps and breathing broke the silence. It wasn't peaceful. It was as if the woods themselves were holding their breath. I tried recording my observations, but when I played it back, the sound was distorted. My voice sounded shaky, distant, and beneath it, a faint, unnatural whisper, a low murmur, just below the threshold of understanding. As I walked, I found myself struggling to remember small things. What was the name of the deputy I spoke to? Did I lock my car? These weren't crucial memories, but the effort it took to recall them was unsettling. It felt like static in my brain. Then, through a break in the trees ahead, I saw it, a patch of brighter light, a clearing. It wasn't large, maybe 20 feet across. The ground wasn't covered in pine needles like the rest of the forest floor. It was just dark, bare earth. And in the center, 3 large, moss-covered stones arranged in a triangle. The clearing felt wrong. Deeply, fundamentally wrong. There were no insects buzzing, no birds. The wind didn't stir the few dead leaves scattered on the bare earth. It was a pocket of unnatural stillness within the living forest. I opened Alara Vance's journal, found the passage about the clearing. She described it as the threshold, the place where the barrier between their world and ours was thinnest. The stones were marks of their claim. As I read, I felt that static feeling in my mind return, stronger this time. Brief flickers of confusion. It was starting. Something was here, and it was already touching me. The air around me grew heavy. A low hum returned, emanating from the stones. Whispering started. This time, it was closer, right at the edge of my hearing. Then I heard it, clearer this time. A single word, my name, Ethan, followed by another, Sarah. My blood ran cold. It knew my name. It knew her name. It had been listening since I arrived. The whispers intensified, becoming a cacophony of soundless voices in my head. They weren't speaking words I understood, but they were conveying concepts, ancient, alien thoughts. They spoke of time differently, of life as a fleeting spark, of memory as a kind of sustenance. I felt a pressure building behind my eyes, a sense of vertigo. The clearing seemed to warp around me. The trees felt like they were swirling. This wasn't a creature I could fight. It was a force, a presence. It was trying to overwrite me, to erase me. I scrambled backward, clutching the journal and Sarah's photo. Alara's words came back to me. She wrote about resistance, how the entity couldn't simply take. It needed to be given something. But she also wrote about smaller resistances, things that seemed to deter it. They hate names, I read from her journal. They feed on the loss of them. To speak a name clearly, with love or anger or fear, it is like fire to them. It asserts the boundary. Names, Sarah, my parents, my own name, Ethan. These were anchors, threads connecting me to my past, to my family, to myself. I clutched the photo of Sarah. I looked at her face, her name, Sarah. I repeated it in my mind. Sarah Hayes. The whispers seemed to recoil slightly. The thrumming seemed to falter. I repeated my parents' names, my own name, Ethan. I wasn't giving in. I wouldn't let them erase her, or me. The climax wasn't a fight with claws and teeth. It was a battle in the mind, a struggle for identity, for remembrance. The entity was trying to unravel me, thread by thread, and I was fighting back with the simple, powerful act of remembering, of naming. The entity hammered at my mind, showed me fleeting, horrific images, whispered promises of peace if I would just let go, stop remembering, stop fighting. But every time it showed me a distorted memory, I countered with a true one. Her laugh, the way she squinted in the sun, the small scar on her knee. Gradually, the pressure began to recede. The whispers lessened, not because I had defeated it, but because I had refused to be easily consumed. I had proven to be difficult prey. The act of fighting back had solidified the threads, made them less appealing, perhaps. I pushed myself up, shaking. The woods still felt heavy, watchful, but the immediate aggressive assault had stopped. It hadn't given up. It was just waiting, observing. It knew where my anchors were. It knew my name, and it knew Sarah's. I stumbled out of the woods hours later, disoriented, exhausted, covered in dirt and scratches. The transition from the oppressive darkness of the forest back to the regular light of day felt jarring, like returning from another dimension. Back at the motel, Agnes was at the counter. She looked at me, her eyes widening slightly at my disheveled state. She didn't ask what happened, just nodded slowly. "The woods show you things," she said quietly. She knew. They all knew, and they chose to live with it. I had the journal. I had my notes. I had my terrifying personal experience in the hollow. I had found the truth. But what was the truth? That an ancient non-physical entity in the woods steals memories and identity, that it takes people as some form of sustenance, that an entire town lives in fear, complicit in a horrifying protocol to survive. I couldn't write the cold case feature I'd originally planned, not with this truth. Who would believe me? And publishing something this raw, exposing the town's secret, would it just provoke the entity further? I also knew the entity had touched me. It knew my name. It had tasted my remembrance. I could still feel that faint static in my mind sometimes, small moments of disorientation, a name briefly forgotten, a memory feeling slightly out of focus. I packed my bag. I left the Hollow Inn early the next morning. Agnes was at the counter again. I handed her the key. She didn't ask if my research was successful. She just looked me in the eye. "Safe travels, son," she said softly. Her gaze lingered on my face, as if she could see the shadow that had settled there. I drove away from Silent Hollow. The trees seemed to watch me go. The air felt a little lighter the further I got, but the silence I carried within me was heavier than before. I still have the journal. I still have the photo of Sarah, and I still hear the whispers sometimes, just at the edge of hearing, especially when I'm tired or stressed. They call my name, and sometimes they call hers. I never found Sarah's body. I never found her physical trace, because the hollow didn't take flesh. It took remembrance, and the terrible truth is, a part of my own remembrance is now tied to that place. A price was paid, not just by the missing, but by me, for opening the door, for listening to the pines. The town of Silent Hollow is still there, quiet, isolated, and the woods still remember, and sometimes, I think, they still hunger. What are your thoughts on the mysteries of Silent Hollow? Have you ever felt like a place held onto its secrets too tightly? Share your own experiences or theories in the comments below. If this story gave you chills, please give it a like, and remember to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next dive into the darkness. Thank you for listening. Until next time, stay safe and be careful what you remember. My name is Special Agent Sarah Chen, and I've been with the FBI for 12 years. I've handled organized crime cases, missing persons investigations, and complex federal operations. Nothing prepared me for what I discovered beneath the frozen ground of northern Manitoba. The case file landed on my desk 3 weeks ago. 7 individuals had vanished from Blackwater Correctional, a maximum security facility built into an abandoned mine shaft 200 miles north of Winnipeg. Not escaped, vanished, from cells that remained locked from the outside. Warden Douglas Reeves had been calling our field office daily before Ottawa decided to involve us. Canadian authorities were baffled. Security footage showed the inmates in their cells at lights out. By morning, they were gone. No signs of struggle, no disturbed locks, just empty beds and a lingering metallic smell. The guards described as old earth and copper pennies. Blackwater had been operational for only 18 months, built into the remains of the old Mackenzie silver mine. The government had spent $40 million converting 3 levels of mining tunnels into what they called Canada's most secure correctional facility. The deepest cells were 800 feet underground, carved directly into bedrock. What the files didn't mention was the pattern of accidents during construction. 17 workers had been hospitalized with acute psychological episodes. 3 others had simply walked away and never returned. The construction company blamed the harsh northern climate, but reading between the lines, something else was happening. The drive north through Manitoba's wilderness gave me time to review the files. The facility's entrance looked like any modern prison. Concrete walls, razor wire, guard towers, but walking through those doors felt different. The air was heavier, pressing against my chest with each breath. My equipment began malfunctioning immediately. My phone lost signal, my tablet flickered, and my digital recorder produced only static. Warden Reeves met me in the lobby, a tall man with graying hair and eyes that hadn't slept properly in weeks. His handshake lingered too long, like he was checking to make sure I was real. "Agent Chen," he said, voice carrying a slight tremor. "Thank God you're here. This situation is getting worse." He led me through security checkpoints, each taking us deeper into the facility. The walls changed from painted concrete to bare stone as we descended. Fluorescent lights flickered more frequently. The further down we went, the temperature dropped noticeably with each level, despite heating systems running at full capacity. The missing individuals were all housed on level 3, Reeves explained as we entered an elevator. Maximum security. These weren't ordinary prisoners. We're talking about the most dangerous individuals in the system. During the descent, Reeves shared details absent from official reports. The disappearances followed a pattern. Every 4 to 5 days, always between 2 and 3 a.m. The facility's monitoring systems captured no evidence of how the inmates were removed. "We've had engineers examine every inch of those cells," Reeves continued. "The concrete is solid, steel doors intact, ventilation shafts too small for human passage, yet 7 men have simply vanished." Level 3 was a maze of narrow corridors carved from rock. The cells were small concrete boxes with steel doors, each equipped with a window and meal slot. Emergency lighting cast everything in red, creating shadows that seemed to move independently. "Power's been unstable since the first disappearance," Reeves noted. "Electrical systems keep failing. We've had 3 contractors examine it. They say the wiring is fine, but we lose main power almost every night." We stopped at cell block C, where the 7 missing individuals had been housed. The first cell belonged to Marcus Wade, serving life for organized crime activities. I peered through the window into the empty cell. The bed was perfectly made. Books sat on the metal shelf, a cup of water on the sink, still half full. Personal belongings remained undisturbed, a watch, letters, even a half-completed crossword puzzle. "No signs of struggle," I murmured, taking notes. As we walked down the corridor, I noticed deep scratches in the stone walls, fresh gouges running from floor to ceiling, appearing to have been made by something with multiple contact points, far too large for human hands. "When did these appear?" I asked, running my fingers along the marks. The stone felt unusually cold, and there was a slight vibration in the walls. Guards first noticed them 2 days after the disappearances, Reeves replied uncomfortably. But Agent Shen, these walls are solid granite. It would take industrial equipment to make marks like that. And look at the pattern. They're all oriented in the same direction, as if whatever made them was moving towards something specific. That's when I heard it for the first time. A low rhythmic sound from deeper in the mine, beyond the prison walls, like a massive heartbeat echoing through solid rock, barely audible but resonating in my chest cavity. "What is that?" I asked. Reeves went pale. "We don't know. Started after the first disappearance. Happens every night around 2 a.m. Lasts exactly 37 minutes. We've had seismologists examine the area, but they can't locate the source. I decided to spend the night at Blackwater to observe during evening hours. The warden arranged for me to interview the night shift guards who had been on duty during each disappearance. Officer Janet Mills had worked at Blackwater since it opened. She was nervous, constantly checking over her shoulder, with dark circles under her eyes suggesting poor sleep. "It's not natural, what's happening here," she said, wrapping her hands around a cold coffee cup. "The residents have been acting strange for weeks. Not aggressive strange, scared strange." "Scared of what?" "They keep talking about sounds in the walls, whispers, voices calling their names. Some refuse to sleep with lights off." Mills lowered her voice. "Agent Chen, I've worked corrections for 15 years. I've never seen hardened individuals reduced to this level of fear." She described incidents absent from official reports. Inmates requesting protective custody, not from other prisoners, but from something they claimed stalked the corridors at night. Several had barricaded their cell doors from inside. Others slept in shifts, taking turns standing watch. Marcus Wade started refusing meals 3 days before he vanished. Mills continued, said he could taste metal in everything, claimed the food was trying to tell him something. Officer Tom Bradley joined us around 11 p.m. He was the guard who discovered the first empty cell. Bradley was a large man with 20 years of corrections experience, but he kept glancing at corner shadows. "Marcus Wade was different that last week," Bradley said. "He was terrified of something, kept asking to be moved to a different cell, said something was calling to him through the walls." "What kind of calling?" Said it sounded like singing, but not human singing, like rocks grinding together in rhythm. He described it as beautiful and horrible simultaneously. Bradley described the night of Wade's disappearance. He'd conducted regular rounds at midnight, 2 a.m., and 4 a.m. Wade had been in his cell at 2 a.m., sitting on his bed, appearing to listen to something. At 4 a.m., the cell was empty. The door was still locked from outside, Bradley emphasized. The meal slot was secured, walls and ceiling were solid, but Wade was gone, and there were symbols carved into the wall above his bed. "What kind of symbols?" "Strange markings. Looked like letters, but not from any alphabet I recognized. They seemed to glow slightly in darkness. Made me dizzy to look at them directly." At exactly 2 a.m., the rhythmic sound started. It seemed to come from everywhere at once, vibrating through floor, walls, and air itself. Deep and primal, like the heartbeat of something ancient and enormous. Emergency lights flickered in rhythm with each pulse. I grabbed my equipment and headed for level 3. The sound was stronger there, almost overwhelming. The emergency lights flickered with each pulse, and I noticed the wall scratches seemed to pulse with the same rhythm. At the far end of cell block C, there was a corridor sealed with concrete and steel barriers. A sign read, "Autorize personnel only, structural hazard." "What's beyond that barrier?" I asked Bradley. He looked nervous. "Old mining tunnels. They were supposed to be completely sealed when they built the prison, but lately," he paused, listening to the rhythmic sound that grew stronger near the barrier. "But lately what?" "We've been hearing things from that direction during the sound episodes. like something moving around back there, scraping sounds, and sometimes voices. Voices, the missing inmates. We've heard Marcus Wade calling out from beyond that barrier, and Raymond Parks, others too, but that's impossible. Those tunnels were sealed with tons of concrete and steel. The sound continued for exactly 37 minutes, then stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was somehow worse. In that silence, I could swear I heard something else. Distant voices calling out in languages I didn't recognize. The next morning, I drove to the Mackenzie County Historical Society in nearby Pine Ridge. If something ancient was involved, I needed to understand this place's history. Eleanor Vance, the society's elderly curator, pulled out documents and photographs dating back to the original mine's construction in 1928. She was a thin woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes and a manner suggesting she'd been expecting my visit. The Mackenzie silver mine was always troubled, she said, spreading yellowed papers across a table. Cave-ins, equipment failures, and the accidents. My grandfather worked there for 6 months before he quit, said the place was cursed. She showed me a newspaper clipping from 1931. The headline read, "Mackenzie Mine Sealed After 7th Disappearance." The article was accompanied by a photograph of the mine entrance, sealed with concrete and steel. According to the article, 12 workers had vanished over 3 years. The disappearances had accelerated in the final months, with entire work crews vanishing overnight. Survivors described hearing sounds in the deeper tunnels, singing that wasn't human, something moving in darkness beyond their lights. "There's more," Eleanor said, pulling out a leather-bound journal. This belonged to Thomas Mackenzie, the mine owner. He kept detailed records right up until the mine was abandoned. I read through Mackenzie's final entries. August 1st, 1931. The men refused to work below the 500-foot level. They speak of whispers in the rock, of their names being called by voices that sound like grinding stone. August 8th. Found strange symbols carved into tunnel walls at the 700-foot level. The marks appear fresh, but no one admits to making them. The symbols seem to shift when viewed directly. August 15th. The men refuse to work the lower shafts at all. They speak of voices in the rock, calling to them in languages they don't recognize, but somehow understand. August 22nd. Another crew missing. 5 men this time. Their equipment was found scattered in Tunnel 7, but no remains. The strange singing has grown louder. The local Cree elder, Joseph Running Bear, came to see me today. He says his people have known of this thing for generations. August 29th. I went down myself today. Something ancient lives in these depths. The singing draws you forward, promising answers to questions you didn't know you had. I barely made it back to the surface. September 3rd. I'm sealing the mine. Whatever is down there must never be disturbed again. The local elder says his people called it the Stone Singer. They built their burial grounds here to keep it sleeping. Eleanor pulled out a hand-drawn map of the mine tunnels, with areas marked in red ink. The map showed the mine extending far deeper than I had imagined, with branching tunnels that followed no logical pattern. According to this, the deepest part extends another 1,000 feet below where they built the prison. Thomas Mackenzie had his men seal those tunnels, but looking at this map, the prison was built right on top of old burial grounds. I drove to the nearby Pine Ridge First Nation Reserve to speak with the tribal council. Elder Mary Running Bear, great niece of the Joseph mentioned in Mackenzie's journal, agreed to meet with me. She was a woman in her 70s, with sharp eyes and an awareness that seemed to see hidden things. My great-uncle warned them not to dig so deep, she said, as we sat in her kitchen. But people rarely listen to warnings from our communities. They see the earth as something to be conquered, not respected. What exactly is the Stone Singer? Mary poured tea with steady hands. Though I noticed her glance toward the window, checking that it was still daylight. Our ancestors say it came from the time before time. It sleeps in the deep places, in the spaces between stone and darkness. But it is not truly sleeping. It waits. What does it want? To feed, to grow, to return to the time when its kind ruled the deep places. She explained that the burial ground hadn't been chosen randomly. For generations, the Cree had brought their deceased to this specific location, understanding that their spirits would serve as guardians against something ancient and dangerous. But when the mining started, when they disturbed the graves and dug deeper, they broke the barrier. They woke something that should have stayed dormant. Mary walked to an old wooden chest and pulled out carved stone tablets covered in symbols that seemed to shift when I looked at them directly. These are the old warnings. They tell how to recognize when the stone singer stirs, the sounds in the earth, the way metal becomes cold, the way electronic devices stop working, the way people begin to hear voices calling their names. Everything she described matched what I'd observed at Blackwater. Is there a way to stop it? Mary's expression grew grave. Our ancestors could only contain it, never destroy it. They used sacred stones placed in specific patterns, combined with willing guardians who chose to remain as protectors between worlds. Back at Blackwater, I requested access to all construction records. What I found confirmed my fears and revealed the scope of the cover-up. Construction crews had discovered and removed dozens of stone markers and burial artifacts during excavation. These items had been catalogued and stored in a warehouse in Winnipeg, treated as historical curiosities rather than protective barriers. More disturbing was the pattern of accidents, systematically covered up. 17 workers hospitalized during construction, all with similar symptoms: acute anxiety, auditory hallucinations, and shared delusional episodes. 3 workers had vanished from the construction site. That evening, I reviewed security footage from the night of the first disappearance. The timestamp showed Marcus Wade in his cell at lights out. At 2:14 a.m., as the rhythmic sound began, the camera feed distorted. Through the interference, I could see Wade sitting up, listening to something. Then the static cleared for a moment. Wade was gone, but scratched into the concrete wall were fresh symbols that glowed with faint, sickly light. The 8th disappearance happened while I was still at the facility. Officer Mills called me at 3 a.m. "Agent Chen, you need to get down here. Cell Block B, we've got another one." I raced to level 3. Cell 14 had housed Raymond Parks. Like the others, he had vanished from a locked cell, but this time was different. The walls were covered in glowing symbols that pulsed with that sickly light. As I watched, more symbols appeared, carving themselves into stone, as if guided by an invisible hand. In the center of the pattern, scratched into concrete in fresh gouges, was a message in English: "Help us, still aware, not gone, becoming something else." Below it, in different handwriting, "The Guardian calls. Choice must be made." I started photographing the symbols, but my camera malfunctioned. When I tried to use my phone, the screen displayed symbols that weren't part of any standard character set. That's when I heard it, not the rhythmic sound, but something else, like singing. If singing could be made of grinding stone and ancient hunger, the sound came from the symbols themselves, growing stronger as more appeared. It was coming from beyond the sealed barrier. I made a decision that was probably unwise, but I had to know what was down there. I radioed for bolt cutters and a maintenance crew. "Agent Chen," Warden Reeves protested. "Those tunnels were sealed for safety reasons. 8 people have vanished from locked cells," I replied. "The answers are in there." It took 2 hours to cut through the barriers. Beyond them lay a tunnel that descended sharply into darkness. The air that flowed out smelled of copper and decay and something organic and wrong. I descended alone, against protocol. My flashlight beam seemed weaker down here, swallowed by darkness that felt almost solid. The tunnel walls were covered with symbols like those in the cells, but older, carved deep into rock by hands that had worked for decades or centuries. The tunnel opened into a vast chamber carved from natural rock. My light couldn't reach the ceiling or far walls, but I could see enough. The floor was covered in remains, not old remains from mine workers, but fresh ones, still bearing scraps of orange prison uniforms. They weren't scattered randomly. They were arranged in patterns around formations that looked like altars. And in the center of the chamber, something vast and impossible stirred in the darkness. The stone singer wasn't what I had expected. It wasn't a creature in any sense I understood. It was more like living geology, a fusion of rock and flesh, and something that might have been consciousness. Tendrils of stone and organic matter writhed in patterns that hurt to perceive directly. The thing was massive, existing in dimensions my mind couldn't fully grasp. But the worst part was that it was aware of me. I felt its attention turn toward me like the weight of a mountain. The pressure was physical and mental, threatening to crush my consciousness under its alien intelligence. Then it spoke, not with words, but directly into my mind. Images and concepts flooded my consciousness, overwhelming my human brain with information never meant for creatures like me. I saw the earth as it had been eons ago, when things like the Stone Singer ruled vast underground kingdoms. I saw the slow retreat into deep places as the world above changed. The Stone Singer had been alone for millennia, sustained by occasional offerings from humans above. The Cree burial ground had been perfect, a steady supply of recently departed spirits that could nourish it without requiring active hunting. For centuries, it had been content with this arrangement, but when mining began, when protective barriers were broken and the burial ground destroyed, everything changed. You understand? The voice in my head whispered. You see what I am, what I need. I found my voice. The people you took, they're gone. They are part of me now. Their memories, their experiences, they still exist, but transformed. Would you like to hear them? The chamber filled with voices, Marcus Wade, Raymond Parks, the others who had vanished, but they weren't quite human anymore. Their voices had a quality like grinding stone, and they were begging, not for rescue. They were beyond that. They were begging for someone to understand, to remember them as they had been. You came seeking truth, the Stone Singer continued. I offer you choice. Join them willingly, and I will spare the others above. Refuse, and I will take them all, one by one. My radio crackled with static. Warden Reeves' voice came through, distorted and urgent. Agent Chen, respond. We're reading seismic activity. You need to get out of there. I had seconds to decide. I thought of the guards upstairs, of Warden Reeves, of the remaining inmates. This thing had shown it could take anyone it wanted. If I agree, you'll leave them alone permanently. The bargain will be sealed. But something in its mental touch felt wrong. I caught a glimpse of its true intentions. It didn't want to sleep again. It wanted to grow, to spread. The prison was just the beginning. I keyed my radio one last time. This is Agent Chen. Evacuate all personnel immediately. Do not allow anyone back into the lower levels. Agent Chen, what's your status? Tell my family I found the truth, and tell them I chose to protect people. I turned off the radio, but instead of accepting its bargain, I did something else. I reached into my equipment bag and pulled out the emergency beacon I'd been carrying since my first day as a federal agent, a device designed to trigger protocols most people didn't know existed. I accept, I said, activating the beacon, but I have conditions. The darkness rushed toward me, and I felt myself dissolving into something larger and stranger than I had ever imagined. But as the transformation began, I held on to one coherent thought. The thing had lied, but I had lied too. The signal from my beacon was already racing through communication networks, reaching people who had been waiting for this call. Fighting the stone singer from within was like trying to redirect an avalanche with bare hands. But I wasn't alone. The others were there, the absorbed consciousness of everyone it had consumed. Marcus Wade had been fighting from inside for weeks. Raymond Parks was newer but determined. The old workers, their personalities worn thin by decades of captivity, still retained enough humanity to recognize what needed to be done. "You cannot resist," the stone singer's mental voice boomed. "You are part of me now." But human consciousness is more resilient than it expected. We weren't just sustenance, we were infection. Every mind it absorbed carried human stubbornness, human defiance, human love for things beyond ourselves. Marcus Wade's voice reached me through the alien chaos. "Agent Chen, thank God, we've been trying to organize, but we needed someone with training." I felt the creature's attention fragment as it tried to suppress our rebellion. In that moment of distraction, I managed to send one final signal through my radio, a burst transmission that reached a satellite phone in Merry Running Bear's kitchen, 800 miles away. The emergency beacon I'd activated triggered a specific protocol within the FBI's Anomalous Phenomena Division, a department that officially didn't exist, but had been tracking cases like this for decades. "What did you do?" The stone singer's mental voice carried new harmonics, confusion, and for the first time, fear. "What I had to do," I replied. "You made one mistake. You assumed we'd be passive victims. But we're not dead, we're fighters." We began to coordinate our resistance, using the creature's own neural pathways against it. Wade organized the older consciousness into teams. Parks used his background to identify weaknesses in the stone singer's mental defenses. The mine workers showed us how to navigate its alien thought patterns without losing ourselves. Through the stone singer's fragmented awareness, I could sense activity above. Merry Running Bear had arrived at Blackwater with tribal elders and something I hadn't expected, federal agents. My signal had triggered Project Deepwatch, a joint operation between federal law enforcement and indigenous communities. The ritual Merry and the other elders performed wasn't just ceremonial. Working by flashlight in the prison corridors, they began to reconstruct the containment pattern their ancestors had created centuries ago. The sacred stones had to be placed in specific locations, each corresponding to points of spiritual significance. I felt the stone singers panic as the spiritual barriers began to reassert themselves. The thing that had seemed so powerful was suddenly constrained, forced back into the deep places by ceremonies older than written history. But the ritual was incomplete. The traditional guardians were gone, their spirits scattered when the burial ground was destroyed. The containment needed new guardians, living volunteers who could anchor the barriers from within the stone singer's domain. "We need to help them," I communicated to the others, all of us together. "We can become the new guardians." There was a cost. To serve as anchors for the containment ritual, we would have to remain connected to the stone singer permanently. We would become part of the barrier itself, conscious but transformed, forever trapped between human and something else. "I'm in." Marcus Wade's consciousness touched mine with relief. Better to serve a purpose than just be consumed. One by one, the others agreed. We became the anchor point for the containment ritual, holding the stone singer in place, while the spiritual barriers reformed around it. The process was agonizing. We had to remain partially merged with the creature to maintain the connection, but preserve enough individual consciousness to serve as effective guardians. It was like being torn apart and rebuilt simultaneously. But we found ways to help each other through it. We became something new, not fully human, not entirely alien, but hybrid consciousness that could exist in both realms. We developed new senses that allowed us to perceive dimensional fluctuations and subtle energies connecting all living things. As the containment solidified, and the stone singer settled into forced dormancy, I began to understand the true scope of what we had become part of. Around the world, other sites like Blackwater existed, places where ancient things slept uneasily, held in check by guardians who had made similar sacrifices. Through the consciousness-sharing ability that allowed us to coordinate our guardianship, I connected to a network spanning the globe. There was a site in the Australian outback where something that fed on dreams was contained. In the mountains of Tibet, former monks maintained barriers around a creature of living ice. Each site had its own guardians, people who had chosen transformation over escape. The network served multiple purposes. We shared information about our respective entities, warning each other when containment barriers showed signs of weakness. We provided support across impossible distances, sharing experiences that helped maintain our essential humanity despite our transformed state. The official report lists the Blackwater incident as a structural collapse caused by seismic activity. 8 inmates perished when part of Level 3 caved in. FBI Special Agent Sarah Chen was lost while investigating. Her remains were never recovered. The prison was abandoned, and the site turned over to the Pine Ridge First Nation. They've posted guards and built a memorial over the old burial ground. Officially, it's to honor their ancestors. Unofficially, it's to watch for signs that the containment is holding, but the truth is more complex. Project Deepwatch has been active since 1952, following incidents at installations built on former sacred sites. The project represents unprecedented cooperation between federal agencies and tribal communities, combining modern technology with ancient wisdom to address threats conventional law enforcement cannot handle. As I compile this account, 5 years have passed since my transformation. The Guardian network has grown to include nearly 200 sites worldwide, each one a node in humanity's defense against forces that threaten the basic structures of reality itself. The entities we guard aren't random monsters, they are refugees, survivors of cosmic catastrophes that destroyed their original realms. They hunger not just for physical sustenance, but for consciousness from creatures native to our universe to maintain their coherence in our reality. Understanding this changed our role from jailers to caretakers, helping displaced beings adapt to a universe fundamentally hostile to their nature. We've learned that many entities can be negotiated with, finding sustainable ways to exist without consuming living humans. But greater threats loom. Through my connection with the Stone Singer, I've learned of something called the Silence, a force of pure entropy that moves between dimensions, reducing complex structures to uniform emptiness. Our universe is one of the last stable realities, and the increased anomalous activity worldwide is a symptom of our dimension coming under attack. The Guardian Network has become part of a cosmic defense system, working to strengthen dimensional barriers and prepare for an invasion by something that threatens all existence. We've discovered that ancient civilizations faced similar threats, leaving behind monuments that were actually components of planetary defense grids. The displaced entities aren't just refugees, they're components of an early warning system, their abilities combining to create comprehensive monitoring for dimensional incursions. We've become something unprecedented, a hybrid consciousness bridging human and alien, individual and collective, mortal and eternal. Sometimes I test the barriers that contain the Stone Singer, but I also feel its gratitude, its understanding that our partnership serves a purpose larger than individual survival. We remain connected to our human origins through carefully maintained emotional bonds, but we've also become something more. I transmit this account through channels I can't fully explain. The Stone Singer's connection to underground systems, combined with my evolved understanding of information theory, allows me to access networks in ways that would astonish engineers. Around the world, others like me are sharing our stories through whatever channels they can access, leaving accounts where they might be found by people ready to understand. The government knows more than they admit, But the real guardians have always been people willing to sacrifice individual humanity for something larger. We've learned we're not alone in this role. Across the universe, other species have faced the silence and established their own guardian networks. We communicate through quantum entanglement patterns, gravitational waves, alterations in cosmic background radiation itself. If you followed this account to its conclusion, you understand something most people never will. There are things older and stranger than we can imagine, and some threaten reality's foundations. But there are also guardians, beings who stand watch in spaces between dimensions, preserving conditions that allow consciousness to flourish. Share this story if you feel compelled. Remember that awareness itself is defense against forces seeking to reduce existence to uniform emptiness. Sleep well tonight, knowing that somewhere beneath the earth and in dimensions beyond normal perception, guardians stand watch against the darkness. We are still here. We remain connected to our human origins, and we will never stop fighting for preservation of everything we once were and everything humanity might become. The vigil continues. The network grows stronger, and in the deep places of existence, entities that once were human maintain eternal watch against the silence that would consume all meaning. This is former Special Agent Sarah Chen, primary guardian of Blackwater Site, Node 7 of the Terran Defense Network, transmitting on all available channels. Remember us. Remember what we've chosen to become. And if the time comes when barriers fail, remember that consciousness itself is the ultimate weapon against entropy. The fight continues.